Right after my husband divorced me, he called my mother and said, "Come pick up your useless daughter. I don't want her anymore." He thought he had humiliated me for good, but just 1 minute later, my mom arrived outside with a convoy of luxury cars, and the look on my ex-husband's face changed instantly. The divorce papers were still warm from the printer when my husband put my mother on speakerphone. "Mrs. Bennett," Daniel said, "come pick up your useless daughter. I don't want her anymore." His sister Carla laughed so hard she had to set down her wine. I remember the sound the glass made on the quartz. I remember that the dishwasher was running and that some useless clerical part of my brain was thinking about the good knives inside it, because Daniel always loaded them blade up and I always fixed it. My mother's voice came through the speaker, calm as a Sunday morning. "I'll be there in 1 minute." Daniel grinned at the phone. 1 minute? Is she parked around the corner in that old Buick? "Bring a trash bag for her clothes," Carla said. The line went dead. 6 years of marriage ended in a kitchen I paid for. 6 years of balancing his company's books at midnight while he took the credit at dinner parties. 6 years of being introduced as the wife who helps with paperwork. Daniel slid the papers across the island toward me. He'd printed them himself, in the office off the mudroom, on the printer I bought. "Take your clothes tonight. Everything else stays." Everything else. The house, the cars, my company. He tapped his chest with 2 fingers, the way he did when he was explaining something to a subcontractor he thought was slow. Mine. Carla lifted her phone and started filming me. "Say something for the group chat, Emily." I didn't say anything for the group chat. Here is what Daniel never knew. He thought my mother was a retired school secretary outside Boston. He thought my family clipped coupons and reused wrapping paper and drove things until the transmissions went. I never corrected him. I grew up watching cousins tear each other apart over money, watching an aunt stop speaking to her brother over a lake house neither of them ever used. So when I met Daniel at a Cambridge fundraiser, I was working as a favor. I gave him my first name and nothing else, not the last name that came with it. He liked that. He liked that I had nothing. My MBA sat in a drawer upstairs under the spare phone chargers. I put it there myself. Nobody made me. I looked at the clock on the microwave. 9:41. For 3 years, I had been printing his monthly bank exports instead of just filing them. Every consulting fee, every transfer he swore was for subcontractor referrals. Every month, the numbers stopped touching each other. "You're quiet," Daniel said. "No speech? No crying? I'm waiting." "For what? Mommy?" Carla zoomed in on my face. 9:42. To explain what happened in the next 90 seconds, I have to go back 4 years. I met Daniel Mercer when I was 30, and I married him 11 months later, and for the first 2 years, I would have told you it was the best decision I ever made. He was 41 now. Back then, he was 35, running Mercer Structural Services out of a leased suite in Newton with 6 employees and a truck that smelled like coffee and drywall dust. He built out commercial interiors, medical suites, bank branches, the guts of buildings nobody photographs. He was good at it. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story where he was always a fraud is a more comfortable story, and it isn't the true one. He worked. He knew every trade by name. He could walk a job at 7 in the morning and tell you which framer was hungover. What he couldn't do was math past a certain decimal point, and he couldn't stand anyone knowing it. I had 2 years at a mid-size audit firm behind me and an MBA I'd finished at night. 6 weeks after the wedding, I sat down with his QuickBooks file because he'd asked me to just take a look, and I found $31,000 in duplicated vendor entries and a payroll tax deposit he'd missed by 9 days. I fixed it in an afternoon. He looked at me like I'd pulled a rabbit out of the ceiling. That was the arrangement from then on. I did the books. He did the world. And I want to be precise about what that meant, because did the books sounds like an hour on Sundays. It was job costing on 11 concurrent projects. It was certified payroll, lien waivers, retainage schedules, quarterly 941s, workers' comp audits, and the AIA billing forms that eat a weekend if you've never seen one before. It was the reason he could bid a medical fit out at 4 in the afternoon and know his margin by 5. 6 years. Call it 15 hours a week in the light months and 40 in the heavy ones. I did the arithmetic once at 2 in the morning, the way you pick at something you shouldn't. At what a contract controller bills in Boston, I had given him somewhere north of $400,000 of work. I never sent an invoice. You don't invoice your husband. That's the whole architecture of it. The thing that made it free was the thing that made it invisible. And the thing that made it invisible was love. And I'd have said that out loud in year 2 without flinching. It never became a job. That was the trick of it. It stayed a favor, indefinitely. And favors don't come with titles or W-2s or a seat at the table when the company hits 4 million, and then 9, and then 22. At the barbecues on our street, Daniel would put his hand on the small of my back and say, "Em helps me with the paperwork," and everyone would smile, and I would smile, and something in my chest would fold itself smaller and go quiet. Carla came into it in year 3. Daniel's older sister, 39, recently divorced, with a son named Noah who was 9 at the time, and who used to sit at our island doing multiplication tables while I closed the month. He was a sweet, serious kid. He liked that I let him use the good calculator. Daniel said Carla needed something on paper for the custody agreement, proof of income. He put her on as a marketing consultant at $4,000 a month. She never marketed anything. Everyone knew. Nobody said it. At Thanksgiving that year, their mother asked what I did, and before I could answer, Carla said, "Emily helps out at the company." And then to the table, not unkindly, the way you'd describe a reliable appliance. "She's basically the help." Everyone laughed. Daniel laughed. I passed the potatoes. Cheerios. Noah, who was 9 and did not understand the joke, said, Aunt Emily does the numbers. And I have thought about that sentence more times in the last 4 years than I have thought about my own wedding vows. I told myself it was a family thing. Every closely held company has one. That was the first thing I told myself. The Wire started that same year. Halstead Trade Partners, LLC. Always the third business day of the month. Never round, which was what bothered me. 60 or 480, then 11,250 hours, then 8,940. Memo line, subcontractor referral fee. I asked him about it the first time in the car on the way back from his cousin's christening. That's how it works, Em, he said. You want the good electrical crews? Somebody's got to make the introduction. Everybody does it. Referral fees are real. They're legal in most of the trades, they're normal in some of them, and there's a version of that sentence that's simply a true description of how work moves in this city. Referral fees are real. That's the thing about a good lie. It stands next to something true and borrows its coat. So I told myself it was nothing. For 4 months, I told myself that. Then in February, I pulled the Secretary of the Commonwealth filing for Halstead Trade Partners because I was reconciling and I wanted the EIN. The registered agent address was a UPS store on Quincy Ave, Suite 214. There is no Suite 214. There is a mailbox numbered 214. I sat at the kitchen island with the laptop open and my hands went cold. Not shaking, just cold, the way they get when you give blood. I closed the laptop. I want you to understand something about denial, because I used to think it was stupidity and it isn't. Denial is an accounting decision. You look at the cost of knowing, the house, the marriage, the 6 people who'd lose jobs, the Christmas at his mother's, and you look at the cost of not knowing, which on that particular Tuesday was 0. You book it to the wrong account and you move on. The next fall, Mercer Structural nearly went under. A general contractor on a Providence job went bankrupt mid-project and took $1.6 million in receivables down with it. Daniel had personally guaranteed the line of credit. The bank called it. We had 11 days. I remember him sitting on the edge of our bed at 2 in the morning with his elbows on his knees, and I remember that I had never seen him afraid before, and that it undid me completely. I wired $840,000 the following Monday. He never asked where it came from. That is the detail people don't believe, and it's the truest thing in this entire story. He assumed. He'd built a whole picture of me out of a used Honda Accord and a mother he'd never met, and when $840,000 appeared, he did not revise the picture. He just felt lucky. It came from a trust distribution I'd been deferring since I was 26. I did the wire from a branch on Boylston Street on a Monday morning in a rain jacket, and the banker asked me twice if I understood the transfer was irrevocable, and I said yes both times, and my signature came out looking like somebody else's. Then I drove home and made dinner and didn't tell him it had cleared until he asked. That was the first time I understood that I had a lever, and that using it would end everything, and so the lever was worthless, which is a thing I now believe most people in bad marriages know and cannot say. His own attorney structured it, put the deed to the house into a holding company as collateral, so the bank couldn't reach it, and so the loan had teeth. Daniel signed a promissory note at 4%, 12-month balloon, and made a joke about how at least now he had a boss. The holding company was called Wheelhouse Holdings, LLC. He never once asked who owned it. I did. Sole member since the day it was formed. He never made a payment. Not one. The note rolled twice on amendments I drafted, and he signed without reading, because by then reading things I put in front of him was beneath the relationship. Here's the part I'm not proud of. When I realized he was never going to pay it, sometime around the Second Amendment, I felt relief, because as long as he owed me, I still mattered to the arithmetic. That's what 6 years of she helps with the paperwork does to a person. You start being grateful for leverage instead of love. I found Bayline Consulting LLC in January, and that was when the ground actually moved. I was rebuilding the chart of accounts because Daniel had let a bookkeeping temp loose in the file while I was at my aunt's funeral, and the temp had dumped 9 months of change order revenue into a suspense account. Cleaning it up meant opening every underlying document. Bayline Consulting was receiving between 2 and 5% of every change order over $40,000. Not a flat fee, a percentage, which is not what consultants get. That is what owners get. The manager of record was C. Mercer Dunn, Carla, not just the phantom $4,000 a month for the custody paperwork. A second entity, invisible from the payroll side, pulling a slice off the top of every overage. $291,000 in 19 months. I sat there with Noah's multiplication worksheet still stuck to the fridge behind me. He'd gotten a 100 and I'd been the one who put it up. And I understood that the woman who called me the help at Thanksgiving was making more from Daniel's company than I had ever been paid in my life, which was nothing. I had been paid nothing. I confronted him. I want that on the record, because people always ask why I didn't say anything. I said it on a Thursday night in March, in the office off the mudroom, with the file open on the screen. He didn't yell. He got very still and very reasonable, which was worse. You went through the change orders. I rebuilt the chart of accounts. You told me to. He rubbed his eyes. Do you know what my sister has been through? Do you know what that custody thing cost her? And then quieter. You've never had to worry about money in your life. He meant it as an insult. He thought he was describing a woman who'd been carried by him. I laughed. It came out wrong, and he took it as agreement, and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't do this again," and went to bed. Don't do this again. I stayed up until 4 making a copy of the file on a drive I bought at Staples for $19. Tomas Ruiz called the house in April. Not the office. The house. The landline we only kept because it came with the the alarm system. He'd found the number the way people find things, and he apologized about 6 times before he got to it. Ruiz Electric, 22 years in business, 11 guys, a shop in Everett. He'd done the rough and finish on 4 Mercer jobs. Mrs. Mercer, I don't want trouble, he said. I just need to know when. It's $118,000. My guys, I'm paying them out of the line. I told him I'd look into it. I said it in the voice you use when you already know, which is flatter than the voice you use when you don't, and I heard him hear it. Then I sat down and looked into it, and my stomach dropped through the floor of that house. Every one of Tomas Ruiz's invoices was marked paid in the system. 90, 120, 160 days earlier. They had been paid, on paper, to Halstead Trade Partners, on a vendor line that had been renamed once in the system and never renamed back. And then I pulled the pay applications, the ones Mercer submitted upstream to the developer to draw funds, and I put them next to what the subs had actually received. They didn't match. They had never matched. The pay apps certified higher numbers than the subs were paid. The difference went out as change order overages, and 2 to 5% of that went to Bayline, and the rest went to Halstead, and Halstead was a mailbox in Quincy. This is the moment the story stopped being about my marriage, because Tomas Ruiz was paying 11 electricians out of a credit line at 9%, while my husband was certifying in writing, under signature, that Ruiz had been paid in full. I went into the downstairs bathroom and sat on the edge of the tub for a while. My jaw wouldn't unclench. I had to hold it with my hand. Then I went upstairs and got a legal pad and started a list of every sub on every job going back 4 years. There were 31 names on it. The email came on April 12th at 4:47 in the afternoon, and it changed the shape of everything. Subject line, MSS, change order variance review, internal, do not forward. It landed in my personal Gmail because 3 years earlier, during the near collapse, I had been the invoice contact for the account, and somebody in accounts payable had never updated a contact card. That's all. That's the whole mechanism. $20 million a year in contracts, and the thing that broke it open was a stale autofill. Northbridge Development. Northbridge gave Daniel 70% of his work. He bragged about them at every barbecue on this street. Northbridge this, Northbridge that. The way a man talks about a girlfriend nobody's met. The thread was 11 messages long. Internal audit had flagged variance patterns on the MSS account. Change orders clustering just under the threshold that would trigger a second signature. Sub-payment confirmations that didn't reconcile to certified pay applications. A recommendation to open a Phase 2 review. They already knew, or they were 4 steps from knowing. I scrolled to the bottom for the signature block because I wanted the name of the person to whom I was about to have to say something unforgivable. Vivian Arroyo, Vice President and General Counsel, Northbridge Development, a portfolio company of Bennett Harlow Group. I read it maybe 6 times. Bennett Harlow Group, my grandfather's initials, and my grandmother's maiden name. The thing my mother had shared since 2011. The reason I'd spent my whole adult life introducing myself as Emily and stopping there. Northbridge had been acquired in 2019. I hadn't known. I don't sit on anything. I don't get board packets. I made a decision at 24 to be nowhere near it, and I had been nowhere near it for 12 years. For 4 years, my husband's company had been living off a subsidiary of my family's holding company, and neither of them had any idea, and the only person standing in the middle of that was me. I sat in my car in the CVS parking lot on Route 9 for 50 minutes, because I finally understood the actual danger. It was not that Daniel would be exposed. It was that when this came apart, every single document had my keystrokes on it. I was the bookkeeper. I made the entries. I renamed the vendor line. I hadn't, but I could not prove a negative to a stranger with a subpoena. From the outside, there was no daylight between the woman who discovered the fraud and the woman who ran it. And the moment anyone learned who my mother was, the story would write itself. The developer's own family, embedded in the contractor. I could have deleted the email. I want to be clear that I thought about it for most of those 50 minutes. I did the other thing instead. On May 3rd, I retained Diane Okafor, CPA, certified in financial forensics, 22 years, principal at a 6-person forensic shop above a bank branch in downtown Crossing. Her office had a radiator that banged and a whiteboard she never erased. Retainer was $12,000. I paid it from my own account, the one Daniel didn't know the balance of. She was blunt in a way I found restful. She looked at my drive, my printed bank exports, my 3 years of statements, and she said, "Mrs. Mercer, before I take this, I need you to understand that if the work product supports it, I will report you." I know. People say they know. I'm asking you to look at me first, I said. Look at me before you look at him. I'd rather find out now. She took the engagement. Then I called Rachel Sandoval, 19 years in matrimonial law, offices in Wellesley, famous locally for a very quiet way of ending very loud marriages. Sandoval read the promissory note, then the wheelhouse operating agreement, then read them both again. "You own the house," she said. "He thinks he owns the house. That's not a legal category." She set down her pen. "Emily, he has been in default for 26 months on 4% of $840,000. Do you understand that you are, functionally, his landlord? I understand it now." And then the third call, which took me 9 days to make. I did not use the email. I want that in the record too, because it's the only part of this I'd want read at my funeral. I didn't forward it to my mother. I didn't leverage it. I printed one copy, put it in a sealed envelope, and I called Northbridge's ethics hotline like any vendor's spouse. And I gave my name, and I disclosed the conflict, all of it, who my mother was, that I'd received received privileged material in error, that I had reason to believe the MSS account was compromised, and that my own hands were on the books. 11 days later, I sat in a conference room on the 22nd floor of a building on Federal Street across from Vivian Arroyo. 18 years, 3 of them at Northbridge, navy suit, a black folder she never opened the entire meeting, and Martin Vesey, Northbridge's outside counsel, 27 years, who did not like me at all. Vesey went first, and he went hard. You're the controller. I'm not a controller. I have no title. I've never been paid. You made the entries. I made the entries I was given documents for. You're a Bennett. Yes, you understand how that reads. I understand exactly how it reads. That's why I called you instead of my mother. He asked me for 90 minutes. He asked the same questions in 6 different shapes, which is what good lawyers do. And at the end of it, he closed his portfolio and said nothing. And Vivian Arroyo spoke for the first time in half an hour. We're going to image everything, she said, including your personal devices, voluntarily, today, or by other means, later. Today, I said, please. Chain of custody form, signed at 3:14 p.m. 2 laptops, 1 phone, 1 $19 Staples drive. I got a receipt for it like it was dry cleaning. Nadine Foster came in July. Special investigator, Massachusetts Attorney General's Office. Fair Labor Division, 14 years. She did not care about my marriage or my mother or Northbridge's exposure. She cared about 31 names on a legal pad. She sat at a picnic table behind a Dunkin' in Everett with Tomas Ruiz and a Spanish language interpreter, and she took his statement, and then she took 8 more. Diane Okafor's preliminary schedule came back on August 19th. 41 months, $1,870,000 in questioned disbursements across 2 entities. Exhibit D was a single page, a chart with 2 lines, certified pay applications against actual subpayments, diverging like a mouth opening. Okafor's cover memo had one sentence I've never forgotten. We find no evidence that the reporting party benefited from or concealed the questioned transactions. I read that sentence standing up in my kitchen, and I had to put both hands on the counter. The last week of September, Daniel got quiet. Not suspicious quiet, efficient quiet. He came home early twice. He asked me on a Wednesday, out of nowhere, whether the old bank statements in the basement were still taking up space. I said I'd get to them. On Thursday, October 2nd at 6:40 p.m., I found a work order on the printer tray. He'd printed it himself and forgotten it because he always forgot the tray. Server migration and legacy data decommission. SAT 10-4, 8 r.a.m. Full cutover. Legacy file archive not retained per client instruction. Not retained. Per client instruction, 36 hours. I stood in that little office off the mudroom, and my heart went somewhere behind my ears and stayed there. I could taste pennies. That's the thing they don't tell you about Panic. It has a flavor. If the legacy QuickBooks file went, the original entry dates went with it. Metadata is the whole case. Without it, Okafor's schedule was a story I was telling. And the paper bank exports. 3 years of them. 4 bankers' boxes. Sitting in the basement, under the stairs of a house he thought was his, and had told me to leave. I called Diane Okafor at 11:40 p.m. She picked up on the second ring and did not sound surprised, which is its own kind of professionalism. Do not touch the boxes, she said. They're going to be gone. If you carry them out of that house tonight, you're a spouse removing documents during a divorce. If a forensic examiner carries them out tomorrow under a preservation letter, they're evidence. Emily, do not touch the boxes. I did not sleep. I sat on the floor of the guest room with my back against the bed, and at some point around 3, I started shaking hard enough that I had to sit on my hands. Rachel Sandoval's litigation hold went out at 6:02 a.m. Friday. To Daniel, to his attorney, to the IT vendor by name, to the bank. Northbridge's preservation notice went out at 8:15. Vesey's, the one that had my hands on the books 11 weeks earlier, was 4 pages long and beautiful. The migration was canceled at 9:52 a.m. Okafor's examiner, a kid named Wes with a bad haircut and a Pelican case, imaged the server on Friday afternoon and took the 4 boxes out through my front door at 4:20 p.m. He gave me a copy of the chain of custody form. 61 pages of inventory. Bates stamped MSS 0001 through MSS 014922. Daniel came home at 7 and stood in the basement doorway looking at the empty space under the stairs for a long time. Where are the boxes? With a forensic accountant, he looked at me. Really looked, maybe for the first time in 3 years. Then he laughed and went upstairs and printed divorce papers. That was 13 days before the kitchen. 9:42. Light swept across the front windows. Then more light. Then more. Carla lowered the phone. A black Rolls Royce stopped at the curb. A second one pulled in behind it. Then 2 Maybachs. 3 Escalades. A Bentley long enough to take up half the street. Doors opened up and down the block. Men in dark suits stepped out and stood at both ends of the driveway like the house had been rented for the evening. Daniel walked to the window with his wine glass still in his hand. What is this? It wasn't a question. His voice had nowhere to go. Carla stopped filming. I'll tell you the unglamorous truth because I've never liked the version where my mother summons a fleet from the sky. Bennett Harlow's annual partners' dinner was that night at a place in Weston, 11 minutes from my driveway. It broke up at 9:30. I had asked her 3 days earlier, the only favor I have ever asked her, to stay close to her phone. She was 40 seconds away. The rest of it was 14 partners, 6 drivers, and 2 people from her office who had absolutely nothing to do that evening and would not have missed it for anything. The rear door of the first Rolls opened. My mother stepped out in a charcoal suit, in no hurry at all, and looked looked at the house the way you look at a listing you have no intention of bidding on. She didn't knock. She owns a house she didn't need to knock on, though she'd have said the reason was simpler. The door was unlocked. The front door opened, and Margaret Bennett walked into that kitchen with a man in a gray overcoat carrying a leather briefcase. Daniel's mouth moved. Nothing came out. My mother stopped in front of him. She was 6 inches shorter than he was. It didn't matter. "Say it again," she said. "Mrs. Bennett, you called my daughter useless. Say it to my face." Carla backed all the way into the refrigerator. Daniel tried to laugh. It came out wrong. Okay. Who are these people?" "Emily," my mother said, without turning around. "Get your coat." I got my coat. "Wait." Daniel put his hand out. "Wait, whatever this is, we can fix it. Emily, tell her." That was when a second woman came through my front door. She was in a navy suit with a black folder under her arm, and Daniel went pale before she reached the counter, because he had been staring at that letterhead on $20 million of contracts for 4 years. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "we need to talk about Northbridge." She didn't raise her voice. That's what I remember. Vivian Arroyo had a courtesy in her that made the whole thing worse for him. She introduced herself fully, title and all, the way you would at a groundbreaking. 3 documents, laid on my kitchen island in the order they'd take effect. Notice of suspension of all active work orders, effective immediately, 7 jobs. Demand for audit access under Section 14. 3 of the Master Services Agreement, the clause nobody reads, the one that lets a client into your books on 10 days' notice. Litigation hold and preservation notice, which he'd already received that morning, and which his attorney had not yet explained to him. "You're going to want counsel before Monday," she said. "Not your corporate counsel, different counsel." Daniel said, "This is her. This is her doing this." And Vivian Arroyo did the single most devastating thing anyone did that night, which was to look mildly confused. Mrs. Mercer self-reported to our ethics line on May 21st and disclosed a familial conflict, she said. "Our review opened in March. She isn't why we're here, Mr. Mercer. She's why we know your subcontractors weren't paid." Then my mother put her hand on my elbow, and we walked out past 14 partners in the driveway, and I got into a car and did not look back at the house. In the back seat, she said, "You could have called me 4 years ago." "I know. I'd have been very unbearable about it." "I know." She looked out the window for a while. Then, "Why the cars? You asked me to stay close. You didn't ask for a parade." "I didn't," I said. "You brought a parade." "Well," she adjusted her cuff. "He was going to need to understand something quickly, and cars are faster than sentences." That is the only sentimental thing my mother has ever said to me, and she'd deny it under oath. It took 14 months, and almost none of it was dramatic. Northbridge terminated Mercer Structural Services for cause on October 29th, after the Phase 2 review confirmed 41 months of certified pay applications overstating subcontractor disbursements. The restitution demand was $2.4 million. Mercer Structural filed Chapter 7 on January 8th. 70% of your revenue is not a client. It's a spine. The Attorney General's Fair Labor Division brought the wage case, and Nadine Foster's file, 31 interviews, 9 sworn statements, Okafor's schedules incorporated as Exhibits C through K, went to the Suffolk County District Attorney in February. Daniel pled in November of the following year. 2 counts of larceny over $1,200, 1 count of filing false certified statements, 2 years in the House of Correction, 9 months to serve. The balance suspended with 3 years probation. Restitution ordered at $1.4 million, which he will pay for the rest of his life at a rate that will never finish it. Halstead Trade Partners, LLC was administratively dissolved. It turned out the mailbox had been rented in the name of a man who framed for him in 2016 and had no idea. Carla was never charged. She cooperated fully, immediately, and with a completeness that told you exactly how frightened she'd been for exactly how long. She signed a consent judgment and disgorged $310,000 over 4 years. Bayline Consulting is gone. I asked Rachel Sandoval one question about the structure of that settlement, and it was whether the disgorgement schedule could be written so it didn't reach a 529 account that had been funded in 2018 before any of it started. It could. It was. Noah is 14 now. He doesn't know I asked, and he never will. And his mother filmed me in my own kitchen for a group chat, and I would make the same call again tomorrow. He got a 100 on his multiplication test once, and I put it on the refrigerator. That's not nothing. That's a whole childhood, actually, if you're the one holding the magnet. Wheelhouse Holdings foreclosed on the promissory note in March. It was the least interesting legal event of the entire year. A notice, a publication, a sale. I didn't keep the house. Everyone assumed I would. Sandoval assumed it. My mother, to her credit, didn't ask. I sold it in June, 11 days on market, and I took $404,000 out of the proceeds and paid 31 subcontractors directly ahead of the bankruptcy queue, because the bankruptcy queue would have taken 3 years and Tomas Ruiz had 11 guys. His was 2 checks, $118,400. He tried to give one back. We stood in the parking lot of his shop in Everett, arguing about it for 10 minutes like 2 people fighting over a dinner bill. And then he cried, and then I cried. And then we both pretended neither had happened, and he showed me a panel he was proud of. I saw Dr. Ellen Barrow, PsyD, 12 years, weekly for most of that stretch. In our 4th session, I told her the thing I hadn't said out loud to anyone, that the worst part wasn't the fraud. It was that I'd put my own diploma in a drawer under the phone chargers, and nobody made me do it. And I'd done it in the first year, when he was still kind. She let that sit for a long time and then asked what I thought I'd been buying with it. I said, being needed. She said, and what did it cost? I didn't have an answer for 11 weeks. 14 months after the kitchen, I was at the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds filing an assignment for a client. I do books now, for real, for money. A small practice, 6 clients, all of them trade contractors, electricians, framers, people who build things and hate paperwork and get eaten alive by it. Tomas referred 4 of them. Daniel was 3 people ahead of me in line. He'd lost weight. He was holding a manila envelope with both hands like it might get away from him. He was there for something small, a discharge, a correction, the ordinary paper of a life being disassembled. He saw me. There was a moment where he could have said something and I could have said something. And the honest truth is that neither of us wanted to. There was nothing left in it. Whatever I'd imagined feeling, and I'd imagined it a lot, at 3 in the morning for years. It wasn't there when I reached for it. He looked away first. He was always going to. I filed my assignment, $12, cash, receipt printed on that thin paper that fades. Walking back to the parking garage, I thought about the barbecues, and the hand on the small of my back, and the smiling, and the thing that used to fold itself smaller in my chest every time. He was right about one thing. I did help with the paperwork.